those joining us from the United States, and a warm good evening to our participants tuning in from India and across the Indo-Pacific. I'm Yogesh Joshi, Indian Community Endowed Assistant Professor and Director, India Center at University of Central Florida. Welcome to this virtual discussion on Operation Sindoor, Lessons and Implications for a Rising India, hosted by the India Center at the University of Central Florida. The India Center at UCF serves as an incubator of ideas, research, and education on contemporary India. It fosters academic collaborations between UCF and Indian institutes of higher learning, while also acting as a platform to deepen mutual understanding between India and the United States. Operation Sindoor, a multi-domain calibrated military escalation launched by the Indian Armed Forces, was initiated in direct response to the heinous terrorist attack in Pahalgam in Indian Kashmir, which claimed the lives of 26 innocent civilians. Among the victims was a US resident from Tampa, Florida, not very far from here, a tragic reminder of how terrorism transcends borders and affects communities globally. As a center that also serves the Indian and the Indian American community in Central Florida, we acknowledge this loss with deep sorrow and solidarity. This operation and the subsequent military escalation are significant for several reasons. First, it marks a rare instance in 21st century where two nuclear-armed adversaries have engaged in a conventional escalation ladder under the nuclear shadow. Second, Operation Sindoor is likely to be studied for decades as a case of calibrated military escalation where a state responds decisively to subconventional threats while managing the risks of nuclear confrontation. Third, it signals a potential shift in the strategic posture of a rising India, particularly in how it employs force in defense of its national interests. States do not and should not resort to use of force and war lightly. But in international politics, it is also the ultimate instrument states use to secure their vital interests and life and liberty of their citizens. The decisions to use force are therefore extremely serious and consequential, and as such, it demands rigorous study and reflection. Today's panel is a step in that direction, an effort to unpack the lessons, implications, and strategic, tactical, and diplomatic contours of Operation Sindoor. We are honored to be joined today by a distinguished panel. My introductions of them are going to be short, but they are among the foremost thought leaders and observers of India's military and foreign policy, and one can easily find pages of information on what they have done, written, and commented on the internet. First, we have with us Ms. Suhasini Haider, diplomatic editor at The Hindu, and has covered conflict scenarios in South Asia extensively during her decades of work in both print and electronic media. We also have with us Lieutenant General, retired Dipinder Singh Hooda, former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Indian Army's Northern Command, who was also in charge of the surgical strikes conducted by the Indian Army in 2016. And lastly, Dr. Happy Mohan Jacob, Associate Professor of Diplomacy and Disarmament at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and founder of the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, and one of the emerging leaders on India's strategic thought and practice, who also taught me during my graduate years in India. Together, they bring a wealth of experience and insights into the strategic, diplomatic, and security dimensions of Operation Sindoor and its broader implications for India's evolving global role. May I ask all in the audience to keep themselves muted? Please post your questions only through the Q&A box on Zoom. Direct engagement is very difficult on Zoom, and as such, we will only entertain questions through the Q&A option. Each of the panelists will make their initial comments for 12 to 15 minutes. I don't know whether Suhasini ma'am has joined us. She was stuck in traffic. Okay, great. So thank you so much. We'll begin with Suhasini Haider, followed by General Hooda, and then Dr. Happy Mohan Jacob. Suhasini ma'am, can I ask you to start this conversation by focusing on the origins of the crisis, the issue of terrorism, why Pahalgam was different, and what it means for Pakistan-India relations, Pakistan-China relations, and the larger diplomatic side of this crisis. Over to you. And thank you so much for joining us.
Certainly, and I'm sure that this will be one of many discussions that will be had, because what we've seen over this 4-day conflict has certainly set a lot of new normals, a lot of new paradigms that analysts will have to discuss, because we were looking at a situation that could have gone either way. And if it had gotten more serious than this, then we'd be in seriously uncharted territory. And I'm sure our other panelists will speak much more to that. But you asked me to speak about what makes Pahalgam and the, as you called it, the heinous terror attack we saw there different from the past. I think what we need to start with before we look at the actual reasons why the attack itself was so different from the others, and why it was imperative for the government to have some kind of kinetic response to it. I think you have to look at 5 basic factors, and I'll go just in terms of chronology and why it was important. I think to begin with, we saw an incident like Pahalgam, 10 years since India and Pakistan had any kind of bilateral dialogue. At the end of 2015, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj had gone to Pakistan to try and restart the process. And they gave it a name. Instead of the comprehensive bilateral dialogue, it was going to be called the composite bilateral dialogue. Excuse me, the other way around, it was going to be called the comprehensive bilateral dialogue. But that dialogue process never took off. Even though there were meetings between her and her counterpart a few months later, it was essentially a terror attack in Pathankot that derailed that entire process. And actually, that process has never been picked up. One must also remember in this particular case that since 2008, India and Pakistan have not actually, since the Mumbai attack, had talks on much else aside from terrorism, although they have tried to pick up some of those threads after the Mumbai attacks, but that didn't go anywhere either. So we're talking about 2 countries that basically have perhaps commander level talks between them, but no real understanding of the other. And I think I'm sorry to say that in these 10 years, so many other processes have also broken down. So we don't have people-to-people ties. We don't have any kind of exchanges. We don't have visas being given out. We don't have trade between the 2 countries. That went down in 2019. We don't have any other forms of communication between the 2. And actually, there's a lot of banning of each other's internet as well. So we're not really in a place where we really understand each other, and there's very little understanding, let alone like or desire for dialogue between the 2 countries at present. That's the first. The second, I would say, is that this comes after, 2025 comes after 2 particular incidents where the Indian government decided it must respond. So in 2016, the government crossed a threshold. And while, and this is a debate that's going on in India right now, while the government has in the past given the go-ahead for cross LOC, line of control, military operations, what we call BAT operations, Border Action Task Force operations, while those have been given in the past, clearance for those have been given and those have been carried out in the past, this was perhaps the first time the government of India announced that it was crossing what is seen as a UN monitored line. And that it was sending its troops in across the LOC to target terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or the Pakistani side of Kashmir. So that was 2016. In 2019, the government went to the next level, perhaps, of escalation, and bombed a part of Pakistan that was not part of the disputed territory. So Balakot in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and said, we are again targeting terrorist infrastructure, but now it is in non-disputed territory. It is where we believe terrorists were. Regardless of what happened, we saw an escalation in the sense that on the Pakistani side, they were no longer going to say that nothing happened. And they did send their jets in return. There was some kind of a skirmish in the air. There was an Indian jet that fell into Pakistan, and the pilot then was returned. So we're seeing 2025 on the backs of these. The third point, this is the first such attack, although there have been other attacks, and I'll come to that, since the moves in Jammu and Kashmir, the moves to reorganize Jammu and Kashmir, bring it down to two separate areas, and then bring those down to union territories. It's the first time since the amendment of Article 370. And the idea that the government had, in a sense, begun to believe that they had changed the paradigm inside Jammu and Kashmir, that terrorism did not any longer have the place it did. And perhaps an attack of this nature could not have happened. There had been some. I think in 2021 or 2022, there was an attack on Amarnath Yatris, in which more than 20 people were killed when the bus they were in got shot at and hurtled over. But that would, but for that, I'll come back to the nature of the Pahalgam attack. So that was the fourth, the third area where I think things had changed. I think the fourth was that, in a sense, the government felt like it had come full circle. It had tried every kind of response to Pakistan from the early 2000s, when General Musharraf actually announced that Pakistan would, give up support for terror groups based there. And that had come after a terrible hostage crisis, IC-814. The whole world had watched Masood Azhar, a wanted terrorist, being escorted across a tarmac in Kandahar. People forget all of these. Prior to 9/11, this happened. And that terrorist was taken away. He went to Pakistan. He continues to this day to live in Pakistan, to roam freely, to organize his cadres, and has support from the establishment there. So since then, we have heard Pakistan say it will curb these terror groups and actually do nothing. India has tried to talk, a dialogue process for 5 years that continued until the Mumbai attacks. India has certainly tried to even have joint investigations on 2 occasions, 2007 after the Samjhauta Express, and then after the Pathankot attack in 2016, to say, okay, you come and investigate what you need to help us find those who are guilty. And India has tried various measures. And the fifth point, and this is where I think it becomes important to talk about what happened in Pahalgam itself. I think the fifth point comes to the days before the speeches that were made by General Munir. Now, most will speak about the speech made by General Munir, where he spoke of Kashmir as a jugular vein, where he spoke of Hindus and Muslims in particular being different. So making a differentiation between the two, almost asserting a kind of superiority for Pakistan over India as a result of that. But there was an earlier speech he had made, which was equally important. And that was to a parliamentary committee speaking about the Jafar Express attack that had occurred in March in Balochistan, where 26 people had been killed, had been executed by the Baloch Liberation Army. And he blamed that on India. In that particular statement that he made to Parliament, he spoke about the need for Pakistan to become, quote unquote, a hard state, and for tough decisions to be taken, for the governance of Pakistan to be improved as well. These were all warning signals, which I'm not sure we caught or missed at that particular time. But Pahalgam happened within days of these 2 speeches being made. Why was the Pahalgam attack different from some of the others we've seen? And General Huda will speak much more to this, I'm sure. At the start, I'll say, as a layperson, as a journalist who has covered Kashmir for about 30 years and covered the repercussions on the India-Pakistan relationship, this was an attack on civilians. And on a religious basis specifically, that those who were in that in Besar and Meadows were rounded up, asked their religion, asked if they were non-Muslims, and particularly the Hindus who were there. I think there was one Christian as well who was killed, and executed very, very in a very decided manner. This was not a terror attack of the kind we have seen, perhaps, where badly trained terrorists run into an area, shoot people indiscriminately. This was very considered. I think the other two things that make this particular attack different and seem much more insidious, if you ask me, is one, the way they were able to come in, to wait their time and to find a place that was not secured. But the second is really the fact that the terrorists were able to get away. But not only that they got away, that they, in a sense, had planned to get away. In the past, we have seen terrorists who have been sent over the LOC almost coming like cannon fodder, as you know, Fidain. They finish killing as many people as they can, and they keep doing it until security forces come, and then and then they themselves are killed. But in this case, it seemed as if after killing 26 people, they, in a very decided way, decided to leave. Maybe they were exfiltrated, maybe they left on their own, but it's certainly something that gives a mind to pause, because it means that this is something that is more considered, that has some kind of conspiracy behind it that needs to be looked into. In a scenario like this, the five things I mentioned, that this was the first time this was happening after all of these various parts had happened, it seemed as if there was no choice for the government but to undertake what they did eventually with the first phase of Operation Sindoor, the attacks on the terror infrastructure. I think their diplomacy was very, was very clear, that telling diplomats that we will have to take some measures, but keeping that message that they will be non-escalatory measures, that we don't intend to attack civilian, military, or economic targets. I think the escalation that followed is something that many will have to look at to see exactly what caused the next part of the escalation. But I think what was clear was this was different, and that the response to it would be different.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive outlay of leading to what led to Operation Sindoor and the changing face of terrorism which India faces. I would now move to General Huda, if he can respond to the nature of the military campaign, India's response on both May 7th and thereafter, the political objectives and the nature and reason of military escalation, and how India forced conflict's conclusion, but also could touch on India's military capability, joint operations, role of different services, and indigenous and foreign defense equipment. Over to you, General Huda. Thank you so much.
So Yogesh, thank you very much. I think Swasni has very clearly described what I call the Pahalgam massacre on 7th May, and also described that it was clear that India would respond. And in response, India conducted strikes at 9 terrorist camps in Pak-occupied Kashmir and in Punjab. Of these 9 strikes, 7 were conducted by the army and 2 by the Air Force. And I think the most significant strikes were the 2 conducted by the Air Force at Bhavalpur and Muridke. These were the headquarters of Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. And struck in the heartland of Pakistan, which was Punjab. As far as India's political objectives were concerned, I think they were very clear, that they would send out a very powerful message that if terrorists attack Indian citizens, we will hit back in Pakistan. And unlike 2016 and 2019, where cross-border attacks were carried out, I think the message was that we are not going to only look at foot soldiers, but at the leadership, terrorist leadership in Pakistan. And very clearly, it was also stated at the beginning that the onus of escalation is on Pakistan. So the strikes that were described by the Foreign Secretary in his first briefing were that these are non-escalatory, that these are measured, and that no Pakistan military targets have been hit. And as I said, so the onus of escalation was on Pakistan. Pakistan military did decide to retaliate. And then the conflict very quickly escalated. Frankly, in my own view, I didn't think the escalation would go as quickly as it did. Within 3 days, we saw attacks on Pakistan Air Force infrastructure, almost all across the length and breadth of Pakistan, on their bases, command control centers, radar sites, runways. This was a fairly sort of devastating attack on the night of 9th, 10th May, which, among other reasons, we could discuss, the reasons for the ceasefire. But I think, among other reasons, this attack was one of the causes of Pakistan calling for a ceasefire on 10th May. In my view, there are three main reasons for this very rapid escalation that happened. The first reason is, now we have this ability to conduct what I say, conduct this war from afar. You can use unmanned systems like drones. You have long-range missiles, which are used by both sides. You have standoff weapons, which you can launch from your own side. I mean, the air forces on both sides have actually not crossed over. Not only the air forces, I mean, no military forces from either side has actually crossed the border. So you have this ability to conduct strikes from your own side, from far away. And I think this gives a very sort of detached feeling. Look, there is no human cost. This is easy to conduct. But the fact is that, these are very precise systems which actually cause damage. And so I think on both sides, there is this sort of willingness to take this one step higher and use these weapons, which you can do sort of from your own side. The second reason for this escalation is, frankly, media and social media. Immediately, you find from both sides calls for this is the last sort of battle. This is the time we have to now do things, and let's not step back here. And this puts enormous sort of pressure on the political leadership, to be seen as backing off. You would recall even after the ceasefire, there were sort of a lot of calls saying, "Why have we done the ceasefire? Why has India accepted the ceasefire? We should have done more." So I think this media, social media, also leads to calls for continuation of conflict, continuation of escalation. And the third thing I think Suhasini has also spoken about is, frankly, there is no crisis management mechanism existing today between India and Pakistan. You're not talking to each other diplomatically. I don't know if there are any really strong back channel mechanisms that exist. So frankly, you are dependent on third-party mediation if it happens. This time the US sort of stepped in, and so the conflict sort of calmed down. But it could well happen, and I'll talk about what could happen in the next crisis. So these are the reasons I think within 4 days the crisis escalated to the level that it did. Looking at today, both sides have declared victory. And it's in a situation where escalation is happening very quickly. It's very difficult to assess, who has won and sort of who has lost. But I think to make an honest assessment, we have to look at how the escalation was managed, and both adversaries would say that while climbing the escalation ladder, who has managed escalation domination at each stage. And I would break down, the military part of this conflict in 3 stages. The first stage, of course, is the start of the campaign on 7th May, when India decided that it would hit these 9 terror infrastructure targets. And I think they did manage to do this successfully. All 9 targets that they wanted to hit were hit, as opposed to, say, 2019, where there were questions whether really has the Balakot camp been hit or not. So I think all these strikes were successfully conducted. The next stage, the second stage is, I would say 7th to 9th May. when Pakistan retaliates with drone attacks, missiles, uh, ceasefire violations across the line of control, particularly in civilian areas like Punch. And again, I think if you calmly look at what was achieved, I think India successfully managed to thwart all these strikes. There was very minimal damage that was caused by these drone strikes and even the missile strikes that were launched, Fateh 1, Fateh 2 missiles that were launched, caused no significant or substantial damage on the Indian side. And the third stage was the night of 9th, 10th May, when I think India orchestrated a very complex and very sophisticated strike on, as I said, air bases all across the length and breadth of Pakistan, to which, frankly, Pakistan had no answer. So if you are analyzing as to who could have been most successful in this 4-day campaign, I would say India has dominated each stage of this escalation ladder. The successful initial strikes, the ability to ensure that Pakistan drone attacks and missile attacks cause no damage, and then actually breach Pakistan air defenses and carry out, as I said, very, very significant and successful strikes on Pakistan Air Force targets. There is also, let me turn to the next subject, a lot of talk about whose weapon systems were better. So Pakistan had these Chinese aircraft, Chinese air defense systems, air-to-air missiles. India had the advanced French fighters, Israeli drones, Soviet equipment like the S-400. And a lot of conversation has happened in media about which systems are better. In my own view, an 88-hour conflict in which really the only serious engagement which took place was an aerial engagement on the 7th of May, which probably lasted for an hour. I don't think this period is enough. I don't think we have seen enough weapon systems engaged with each other to be able to really start passing judgments on whose weapon systems are better, or the Chinese are better, or the French Rafale is not good enough, or something like that. So I think we should be cautious about looking at one engagement and saying, look, this is how weapon systems are performed, whether it's Chinese or whether it's Western weapon systems. What is also notable, Yogesh, in this was that after Kargil, this was one operation where all three services operated in complete synergy. So we saw 2016 was literally a pure Army operation. 2019 was a purely Air Force operation. Here, as I mentioned, starting from the initial targeting, where we had both Army and the Air Force conducting strikes on terrorist targets, the manner in which we have countered drones and missile systems, where both the Army Air Defense and the Air Force Air Defense needed to work in complete integration with each other. And while the Navy was not directly engaged, I think the pressure from sea, a threat in being, and I would hazard a guess that if it had carried on for another couple of days, you would have actually seen also the Navy in action in and around the waters of Pakistan. So there was great synergy, great jointness that happened between the three services. There is also a lot of talk about how well the Indian indigenous systems have performed. And again, here I would like to caution that while we would like to promote private players, we know there are issues with public sector undertakings, issues with the DRDO being able to, in a timely manner, provide what India needs. And so we need to promote private players. But I think we also need to accept that the Indian defense industry is not yet so well developed that we can start saying, look, we can do everything ourselves. So while we promote indigenization, I think there is also a requirement that today we need foreign systems so that we don't have any capability gaps till the time that our own defense industry sort of gets indigenized. And my last point, Yogesh, I want to make on the nuclear issue. So while we are saying that we have, sort of the nuclear card being played by Pakistan has run this course, and that there is option for limited use of conventional forces below the nuclear threshold, is it going to make Pakistan rethink its strategy of continuously sort of waving the nuclear card? I think, they will probably double down on this with a feeling that, look, while limited conventional forces, limited use of force could be there, but it's our nuclear forces, nuclear arsenal that prevents India using its superiority in conventional forces to actually do more than what they are doing. So despite our saying that we have overcome the nuclear blackmail, I fear that the next crisis you will probably find earlier nuclear signaling by Pakistan rather than later. And so that's something that we need to look at and see how we can manage. And this nuclear signaling, frankly, is not going to be so much directed at India as at the international community, which I fear sort of always overplays, this issue that look, here is this two neighbors fighting in a nuclear overhang. I mean, we never talk about India and China as two nations with nuclear capability whenever we have a crisis. It's only in the India-Pakistan context that we talk about it. But this is an issue, I think, that needs to be sort of looked at and deliberated a little more. So Yogesh, I'll finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for running us through the events around the military escalation ladder, but also the larger implications and lessons from this. I will now request Dr. Jacob to talk about the larger strategic significance of Operation Sindoor on India's approach to use of force, doctrinal changes it has introduced, the expanding space for conventional operations under the nuclear shadow, which the General Huda briefly touched, and also India's relations with great powers such as the US and China. Over to you, Dr. Jacob.
Thank you, Yogesh, for this invitation to this very important conversation. I'm so glad to see you steering some of these important dialogues in the United States, and proud to see you doing so well. I'll sort of share my thoughts in three parts, and the first part is going to be on what Operation Sindoor tells us about India's approach to the use of force. I think in order to better understand the recent standoff and its implications, it is important to understand the historical context of the India-Pakistan conventional domain, as it were. So let me sort of, the way I see it, paint this picture of the Indian dilemma of response to terrorism emanating from Pakistan. Since the nuclearization of India and Pakistan in 1998, India has shown a certain unwillingness or inability to kinetically respond to Pakistan's use of subconventional action, mainly in Jammu and Kashmir. This was evident in 2001 after the Indian Parliament was attacked in December 2001. The Indian forces mobilized but didn't really go to war with Pakistan or carry out any conventional strikes against Pakistan. This was also the case in 2008 when Mumbai was attacked. The only time I think the Indians did use force after nuclearization was in 1999 during the Kargil crisis. But even then, I think there was no cross international border action, as it were. It was limited to the Kargil sort of space across the line of control to take back the territory that Pakistanis had occupied. So the Indian side during the 2000s talked about, especially after the aborted Operation Parakram of 2001-2, Indian side talked about cold start as a theoretical construct in response to terrorism, but it was never formally adopted or utilized, as it were. The Pakistani side sort of smartly raised the chatter about full spectrum deterrence, about TNWs, tactical nuclear weapons. And in some conversations, they would even sort of talk about the pre-delegation of launch authority to forward commanders as far as tactical nuclear weapons were concerned. Now, this was, I mean, you could probably say that this is just chatter. There's nothing serious about it, but this chatter was so serious that it spiked during the mid-late 2000s in some ways in both in Pakistan and in the international community. Several war games were conducted about if India were to use cold start, how would Pakistani tactical nuclear weapons sort of come into play, etc., etc. Now, this in turn led to increased concerns in the international community about nuclear escalation in the subcontinent. In fact, I would say the Pakistani chatter about nuclear weapons were aimed precisely to induce this fear in the international community about nuclear escalation. Therefore, for Pakistan, this was a double bonanza in some ways. On the one hand, you had the international community focusing on Jammu and Kashmir to the dislike of the Indian side, and on the other hand, the international community would ask the Indian side to stand down because of the fear of nuclearization, as it were, nuclear escalation, as it were. So the tragedy in some ways was that it was not just the international community that believed that Pakistan was serious about its nuclear sort of posture, about TNWs and full spectrum warfare. But even the Indian side, to some extent, believed in this sort of Pakistani bluff about nuclear sub rattling, as it were. So as a result, I think what happened is that India found itself in a sort of strategic trap, unable to create a doctrine to effectively respond to this context in which Pakistan could use subconventional force with impunity. So you have subconventional attacks coming from the other side, but India is not able to respond to that because of all that I just pointed out. And then, of course, there was the issue of evidence. The international community in general would expect India to furnish proof immediately before India would undertake any action against the Pakistani use of conventional force, conventional violence, as it were. I mean, clearly, it is not possible for India to come up with evidence immediately after an attack takes place. Not that the provision of evidence would lead to anything. You have the question of the Mumbai trial still sort of languishing in Pakistani courts. You have the issue of I think, as Suhasini earlier pointed out, the Indian side invited the Pakistani investigation team to Pathankot after the airbase was attacked, and the Indian side was not even given a return invitation to visit Pakistan to complete the investigation. So the evidence does not lead to any sort of to any logical conclusion, as it were. So how did India overcome this sort of a strategic dilemma, as it were? I think Delhi broke out of the strategic trap in 2016 when General Huda was the was the Northern Army commander, by carrying out the cross LOC surgical strikes. Now, I would say this was more symbolic in nature than say in a strategic sense of the term. The effect was more symbolic. The effect of the strategic the surgical strikes, as it were. It was cross LOC operation. It was surgical. It was precise, and it was politically owned up by New Delhi. And it sort of articulated what the intentions of the surgical strikes were. So to that extent, I think it had a certain impact on a sort of doctrinal evolution in Delhi about how to respond to Pakistan's use of subconventional force. And then you have, so 2016 was the beginning of that change. And then 2016 experiment sort of got solidified in 2019 after the terror attacks in Kashmir and the sort of standoff between the two sides. And I would say this doctrine of responding to subconventional terrorism, subconventional attacks with conventional sort of force is in some ways set in stone in 2025, in what happened earlier this month. Let me sort of now, with that sort of context, move on to the expanding space that India today has for conventional operations under the nuclear shadow. I think India traditionally faced a double dilemma when it came to the employment of force vis-a-vis terrorism. Dilemma one, as I just discussed, of responding to Pakistan's subconventional action without triggering Pakistan's nuclear reaction. which it had indirectly threatened and in some ways brainwashed the international community about. This was progressively, as I said earlier, overcome between 2016 and 25, slowly and steadily. India tested the Pakistani nuclear bluff, I would say. And today, 2025, I think there is a certain feeling in Delhi that it is not as if the Pakistanis are going to sort of climb the nuclear escalation ladder as soon as India launches a conventional operation. The second dilemma in some ways is to sort of the second dilemma that India faced when it came to the use of force was to create an equivalence between subconventional force or subconventional use of violence and conventional sort of force, as it were. Why is that necessary? It is necessary because Pakistan's argument was that subconventional terror attacks are qualitatively different from conventional military strikes, meaning that terror attacks cannot be responded to by military attacks for four reasons. Reason number one is carried out by non-state actors over whom Pakistan, it claims, has no control. The other, of course, is not carried out by non-state actors, is carried out by state actors, which is India, that it will carry out a conventional strike in response to that. The second argument they would make is that there is no conclusive evidence to show that Pakistani state is or was responsible for non-state actors or their actions against India. The second argument. The third argument was that these attacks, be it Pahalgam or the earlier attacks before that, were false flag operations conducted by Indian forces themselves. And Pakistan had nothing to do with that, or the elements based in Pakistan had nothing to do with that. The fourth argument was that these operations were, or these attacks were carried out by Kashmiri freedom fighters. So using these four arguments, Pakistan in some ways took India in circles in 2016, 2019, and 2025. I think the Indian action in 2016, 19, and 25 basically attempted to call the Pakistani nuclear bluff on the one hand and bridge the sort of artificial psychological gap between subconventional and conventional domains, as it were. Now, I would also make the argument that the Operation Sindoor has, in some ways, in my understanding, set a tripwire for Pakistan. And what's a tripwire here? By negating the distinction between subconventional and conventional spaces, the domains, India is today attempting to make a tripwire situation for Pakistan. That is, the Indian message to Pakistan is that the initiation of escalation is at the subconventional level, not at the conventional level. The Pakistani argument is that, hey, you attack us and we'll attack you back. Wait a minute. India is now saying the attack hasn't been initiated by us. The attack is initiated by your side, which is through a terror attack. So if you want to stop conventional escalation, don't initiate subconventional action to begin with. I think this is a tripwire. So you cross, and that's the initiation of the standoff between the two sides. I would say that the conventional domain is India's sweet spot in many ways. I think there is a sense that there is a sense or argument that Pakistan has put up a decent show during the recent conventional standoff between India and Pakistan. I tend to agree with that. I think Pakistanis did not do a terrible job going by open source literature and evidence. It appears that the China-made weapons have not done a bad job in the India-Pakistan conflict recently. But I think if you focus on this argument that if you focus on Pakistan's conventional gains alone, you will miss the point about India's strategic gains. And India's strategic gains in some ways, as I said earlier, are number one, that India has found abundant space under the nuclear shadow for conventional action, that it has obliterated in some ways the psychological gap between subconventional and conventional domains, and it has created a psychological tripwire for Pakistan. So in that sense, notwithstanding Pakistan's decent conventional military performance, India has Pakistan where it wants, which is in the conventional space. If in a longer conventional conflict, Pakistan will find it extremely difficult to prevail against India. And I think they will realize it over time if this happens over and over again, which is what I call deterrence by exhaustion. Let me highlight another factor why I think Pakistan's decent conventional performance is not bad news for India. The better it performs conventionally, the less the international community will be worried about a nuclear exchange in South Asia. And the less Pakistan will be able to use the nuclear card to get the international community's attention, the better it is for the Indian side to sort of carry out conventional strikes against subconventional action. And the more Indian side uses conventional action against subconventional action, the more Pakistan will be restrained in using its own subconventional force on India. So I think the Indian strategy, in my opinion, is to normalize conventional action without getting the international community too worried about Pakistan going ballistic, literally. Let me sort of how many minutes do I have, Yogesh? Okay, I'll take a couple of more minutes. I sort of very quickly want to sort of reflect on the India and great power balance after in the wake of Operation Sindoor in some ways. Well, I think that from a strategic point of view, Operation Sindoor was a major marker in the Indian use of force. I do think that it may have actually thrown up some surprises in the broader balance of power context, not in a causative sense of the term, but by way of highlighting what awaits us going forward. In other words, to fully appreciate the implications of Pahalgam and Sindoor, we may need to locate these two within the larger strategic parlance, which has dramatically changed since the second arrival of Trump in the White House in the United States. So let me sort of very quickly look at the four key assumptions, or the four key assumptions that India was operating with. Indian regional strategy was heavily dependent on certain structural conditions provided by the global balance of power that existed until the arrival of Trump in the White House. And these are four elements, or four assumptions, as it were. Number one, great power. I think India assumed that there was going to be a great power competition between the US, China, and Russia in some ways, and India's significant being central to that sort of great power competition or calculus in some ways, while Pakistan was not central to that kind of a great power competition calculus, as it were. Number one. Number two, the United States would continue to play a major and influential role in South Asia was the Indian assumption in some ways. The third assumption was that the Euro-Atlantic grouping post or the Euro-Atlantic sort of NATO and Europeans and the Americans put together posed a formidable challenge to Russia and Russia-China partnership indirectly. While I mean, it was clear that India did not want Russia to lose the war and end up in the Chinese camp, it also did not prefer a triumphant Russia and a revisionist China becoming a major pole. I think the structural interests of a Russia-China campaign are diametrically opposite to India's structural interests in some ways. The third element, in some ways, the fourth element, is that India had thought that a victorious Russia in Ukraine would be of India's interest. Russia may be winning the war today, but it hasn't stopped Russia and China from coming close to each other. So in some ways, therefore, the timing of the Sindoor, Pahalgam and Sindoor couldn't have been worse for India in some ways. You are looking at a slowing down of great power competition. You're looking at uncertainty about the US objectives in South Asia, in the larger South Asian region, a decline of the relationship between India and Russia in some ways, which is a structural decline that has been happening for some time, and the rise of China, the rise of Chinese power in a more prominent sense of the term in South Asia. So I think very quickly, and I'll take 1 minute to sort of highlight this and I'll end with that. I think what the standoff has highlighted based on these assumptions India was operating, but the standoff has highlighted that China has replaced the United States as the most consequential power in South Asia, at least for the moment. While the United States continues to be the most powerful military actor globally, I think geopolitical influence depends on both power and intent. And I think the Americans have power, but has no intent in South Asia, number one. Number two, and I think that does not sort of bode well for India. Secondly, I think the second most significant aspect of contemporary South Asian geopolitics is the unmissable decline of Russia's capability to serve as India's most consequential strategic partner in the region. That was an assumption that India had earlier on. The third, I think, a significant aspect of the regional geopolitics that was evident during the standoff between India and Pakistan was the inherent limits of India's external balancing options, or the external balancing options that are available to India are far more restricted or limited than India otherwise would have imagined. And I think, as I said, the standoff has only highlighted some of these geopolitical implications. They haven't caused it. So I think it's good for India and for us to sort of be aware of some of these issues. Back to you, Yogesh.
Thank you so much. Uh, we've kind of covered from the very specific to the larger grand consequences of this episode, and we now have almost 25 minutes for the question and answer session, because we will have to stop exactly at 10:15. It's Friday evening in India, and I think our panelists also need to get their time to enjoy that Friday evening. But let me
and the IPL match also.
Sure. Let me start with posing my own questions before our audiences can come up with. We have a few questions, but so I'm gonna start with the same order with Suhasini ma'am first. Uh, what are the lessons to be learned in terms of India's diplomatic engagement through this whole period after Pahalgam? Uh, there are questions regarding India's diplomatic engagement and what could India would have done differently. What should India expect at the level of diplomatic engagement? Uh, Pointing to what thoughts Dr. Jacob left with. So if you can focus on that, that'll be great. For General Huda, so there are two things, right? One is to fight a war you want to fight, right? And but in strategy as or in war, the adversary always has a say, right? That's what makes strategy in war very, very different. Uh, so should India now, if has to pursue these options, look at fighting these short wars differently. And we have been doing that. There's a lot of change over a period of time, but given the threat scenario, you have very different kinds of adversaries, right? Which brings me to the idea of this greater collaboration which we see between China and Pakistan and the two-front war, which you have mentioned in your comments and your writings before. So, what are the implications of this operation on those two larger ideas? And lastly, for Dr. Jacob, what does Operation Sindoor and the lessons we have learned out of it does to India's preference for a multipolar world? Have we really engaged and questioned the premises of a multipolar world, which the Indian, foreign policy kind of strives to? But have we really thought through what this would mean for India, so to say? So we can start with the same sequence. Suhasini.
All right, thank you. And thank you for asking the question, because I think there is a lot of, analysis right now of where India's diplomacy didn't perhaps match up with the fact that militarily India has acquitted itself very well in Operation Sindoor. I think the first thing is to dispel the notion that diplomacy failed in some way. Because, there are several reasons why a country's narrative prevails. And I think over time, it's still very early to say whether India was able to check all the boxes it wanted to. But you're absolutely right. The fact that a government that has made no real qualms about what it thinks of its opposition, or what it thinks of, sort of diverse membership of the parliament, has chosen to populate 7 teams of parliamentarians from all over India, send them to, I think 33 countries. There are 60 people that are traveling to all of them. I think it does indicate that somewhere there the government felt that its message had not been heard loud and clear. So where are those where perhaps, as you said, a lesson can be interpreted in some way? I think the first one is an obvious one, which we possibly should have internalized much more. I don't think the government was in any doubt of this. the fact is India does have to walk a very lonely road when it comes to Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. This is not the first time we're facing that. This has been, a problem for decades. I think when you talk about the global war on terrorism, actually speaking, the global war on terrorism began and ended with the US, as in they began to see a global war after 9/11, and they stopped seeing that global war after American troops pulled out of Afghanistan. So that span between 2001 and 2021, if you like, was where we heard a lot about the global war on terror. But actually, India has been affected by terrorists, particularly those who have also been part of other global wars. But somehow that has got lost, and nowhere near the kind of international understanding of India's concerns as perhaps they felt after the Mumbai attacks, where there were so many nationalities who were involved, who had been hit as well, and India's own diplomatic campaign there. So that's, I think, the first lesson, that the global war on terror is something that is not necessarily going to be the wind behind India's sails when it goes into this. The second part of that is, while there is worldwide condemnation of the Pahalgam terror attack, as soon as we launched Operation Sindoor, I think the first round of targeting of terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan, which was very clear, Bahawalpur, Murid Ke, go after every specific terror group that had at some point targeted India. And there's no doubt about the names of these groups or what attacks they had been behind in the last 25 years or so. But there isn't as much support, if you like, for what followed. So the moment it starts becoming escalatory, the moment it starts becoming about two nuclear neighbors, you see a very different world position. You see a lot more countries saying, we want to negotiate, we want to mediate, can we take messages between the two? I'm not sure why there's such an outcry against the idea of mediation. The government has denied there was any. But there's this carrying of messages, conflict management has always been the case between India and Pakistan. You can go back to 1965, 1971, 1999, and all the way since then. I think the third, and Dr. Jacob pointed to that, is we must now reanalyze China's position on all of this. There's no doubt that first conversation held between Wang Yi and Ishaqdar, and the statement that China put out after that, saying that China will support Pakistan's right to defend itself, and that came before Operation Sindoor, seemed to almost be a threat to India, that if there is kinetic action, that China will be a part of it, or will at least have Pakistan's back. And events seemed to indicate that was the case. I think these are three lessons that we really need to take, that we really need to understand. There are others where you can question how India is now portraying itself. Dr. Jacob and General Huda really put out how the posture, in a sense, has changed. But we really need to think about whether that posture is translating diplomatically. It may not translate diplomatically, and we may say that's fine. India may say it's a lonely road, we're going to walk it alone. But essentially, if you look at the Prime Minister's speech of May 12th and look at the three new normals he speaks about, is there an international kind of understanding when India says the next act of terror will be seen as an act of war? Because what is the threshold then? Is there a threshold at all? Is there an understanding when India says we will not succumb to nuclear blackmail? Does that mean the nuclear risk involved, at whatever minimal level it is, between two nuclear capable countries, does not matter? Because if we look in terms of other countries that have carried out this kind of kinetic action in response to a terror attack, whether it's the US and Afghanistan and Yemen and Israel and Lebanon and Iran, I mean, not Iran actually, but on the others, then those have been on countries that aren't nuclear powers. So you can't compare those actions necessarily. So that's the second thing. Is there around the world an understanding that India is able to stare the nuclear blackmail in the face and not take it as seriously? And the third, that there won't be, as Dr. Jacob said, there won't be a differentiation between state actors and non-state actors. This also becomes a little, it could become a dangerous trend, because if you add that to the first part, which is that any act of terror is an act of war, essentially you are giving anyone with a gun leverage to set off the next India-Pakistan war. And I think that's something that it's not necessarily true, but it is necessarily a perception externally outside India that India will have to engage with. As I said, it may decide it does not need to engage with it, and other countries don't ask permission, neither will India. But I think diplomatically, we must understand that other countries do have concerns, that they will get involved, and at some point or the other, India will have to deal with it. The kind of stance taken by a lot of social media trolls, as if India can just afford to boycott every country that is not seen as a friend of India's. I don't know how long that can last.
General Huda?
Okay, thanks, Yogesh. So, is there a new way of war fighting that we need to look at? And Happymon talked about, the cold start doctrine, which was basically adopted after our mobilization that took place in 2001. And we decided this slow pace of mobilization is not going to work. And the cold start doctrine essentially said, as soon as anything happens and India decides that we need to act, literally the whole Indian military will be at war with Pakistan in a matter of 5 or 6 days. Full-scale conventional conflict is going to happen. And I think over a period of time, many of us have been saying that this doctrine actually is not workable, not because the military is not prepared to go across full scale in a period of 6 days, but possibly you are not going to get political sanction for a full-scale conventional war against Pakistan in a matter of 48 hours. And therefore, the military mobilizes. So many of us have been saying we need to look at fighting a war which escalates gradually. And I think over a period of time, this understanding is there. So which actually means a different way of war fighting, which means how do you climb the escalatory ladder? How do you manage escalation? How do you do escalation domination at each stage of the battle? And I think 2016, 2019, and now 2025 have put that doctrine in place. On the issue of two-front war, Yogesh, look, the two-front challenge is a reality. I'm not talking about a two-front war here, but a two-front challenge has been a reality since many, many years. We have an unsettled border with China. We are seeing that the Chinese attempt to coerce India militarily by small-scale actions on the border. This is actually stepped up after Xi Jinping came to power. So you look at 2013 in Depsang, 2014 in Chuma, 2017, and then 2020 was a very clear manifestation of an attempt at military coercion on the India-China border. On the Pakistan border, there is continuing infiltration. There is attempts to send in terrorists to carry out terrorist attacks within Jammu and Kashmir. So that challenge obviously remains. So the two front is a reality. My only sort of concern at this stage is that we need to be clear as to who's our long-term strategic challenger. And that long-term strategic challenger is China. And so therefore, we should not focus so much of our military attention on Pakistan. I'm not saying disregard it, but in this whole Sindoor business, and in the statements that that have been made after that, we should not lose sight of the fact that, look, the bigger military challenge which could come up in the future is the almost 3,000 kilometers of an unsettled border that we have with China, that we can't uh, we can't uh, we can't have a capability differential, military capability differential so much with China that after 5 years it becomes something that we are unable to handle. And so the two-front challenge will remain, but to me the sort of primary challenge still remains how to deal with the Chinese sort of military activity, which is going to take place on the line of actual control. So that's as far as the two front sort of challenge is concerned.
Sounds good. Happy, sir, for you. If you could be brief, I have a number of questions now from the audience, and I will pose them to you. So
I'll just be very brief and take a minute. Actually, you asked about the lessons to be learned for India from Operation Sindoor in the context of its desire for a multipolar world, as it were. I think it's a situation of careful what you wish for, right? I mean, I think the thing about you and I think about the multipolar world is that it's far too unpredictable. To be fair, in times of multipolarity, multipolarity is not as neat as unipolarity or bipolarity. It's messy, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic. But from an Indian point of view, whether unipolarity during the 1990s or bipolarity during the Cold War years, neither was good for India. I think that's also precisely why the Indian side, the Indian state likes a multipolar world order, more so because in a multipolar world order, your chances of becoming a pole are higher than a unipolar or bipolar world order. So if you want to be a pole, it comes with its chaos, and it comes with its mess, and it comes with its responsibility to manage that mess, I guess. But I think I would say, I'll stop with that. I would say I'm less worried about multipolarity than I'm worried about the inherent limits of multi-alignment as a strategy. And I think India has been sort of a firm believer in the sort of strategy of multi-alignment. But the problem with that is that, as a lot of people would point out, if you are a friend of everybody, you're a friend of nobody in some ways. But having said that, even the best of alliances are actually breaking up these days. I mean, you have the NATO, you have the transatlantic alliance that's sort of in trouble. So in a sort of unpredictable, chaotic international system, even sort of alliances are finding difficult to continue to have any salience, as it were. So I think for me the real takeaway, and I end with that, the real takeaway really is that India must prepare for its own wars. The India that faced a bipolar world or a unipolar world is not the India that is facing a multipolar world. It's far more stronger today. It is the fourth largest economy in the world. So I think we must be able to prepare for those vital national security contingencies, as it were. So I wouldn't blame too much on multipolarity, but I think it's sort of the way it is. You can't do much about that. You can't question the whites, as it were. So.
Right. Thank you so much. So now there are a few questions. So first of all, there has been some criticism on the attribution problem with the Pahalgam attack. If any one of you wants to take that question of, if there's always a problem in attribution of terrorist attacks, and how does that play into the larger dynamics? The second is also the role of media, information, disinformation, and how it affected the crisis, so to say. Uh, for Lieutenant General Huda, there is a question on potential scenarios of the future of Pakistan and turning them into a peaceful, terror-free state. Uh, if that is, what could India do in that sense? And lastly, there is a question on, uh, you know, performance of French Rafales as well as India's domestic missile systems. If any one of you wants to weigh into that. And I would say that we kind of rope in these questions with your final comments. So we start in the reverse order this time with Dr. Jacob.
Yogesh, could you just repeat the first question once more?
So this was regarding the attribution problem with terrorist attacks, particularly with Pahalgam. So if you could weigh in on that.
Right.
Dr. Jacob.
Right. Sorry. So I will take the attribution issue and leave the more technically sophisticated ones to Suhasini and General Huda. On the attribution question, I think as I mentioned earlier, I think this is the standard argument that comes out of some of India's own friends in the international community, and clearly also from Pakistan, that where is the evidence that the Pakistani state has carried out or sanctioned this attack. To begin with, I think the reality is that the TRF did take responsibility, at least early on, for this particular attack. And TRF is clearly linked to LET, and LET is based in Pakistan. Now, to me, that looks like a clear chain of custody or causation, as it were, number one. Number two, I think in a terrorist attack of this kind, it is especially if it is well planned by certain handlers, it is not easy to sort of have that forensic evidence to be put on the table before India takes any action. In any case, if you were to go in for forensic evidence, it will take months and years for that forensic evidence to come through. And once the forensic evidence comes through, everyone forgets about everything else. So there is no space for any attribution or any responsibility for that matter. Let's look at somewhat different. Look at it somewhat differently. What about evidence in the past? India has given evidence to Pakistan on the Mumbai trial, and the manner in which the Pakistani state has conducted the trial in the Pakistani courts has been abysmal. Number one. Number two, as Suhasini pointed out, you had Pakistan this time also asked for joint investigation. There was a time when India accepted joint investigation in 2016, January, when the Pathankot Air Base attack took place. The Pakistanis did come to India, and they never asked India to come to Pakistan to complete the investigation. So I think a lot of this is smoke screen in some ways. There is no way that you can sort of get through to this. I think the way to look at this is, I think as Suhasini also referred to this, that you have to look at the context in which it has taken place. There was a lot of unhappiness in Pakistan about India not talking to Pakistan on the Kashmir question. There was also the new army chief making a certain communally charged statement about Indians, about Hindus. So I think that was also the context in which this has happened. So it hasn't really happened out of thin air in some ways. But let me also say that if the Pakistani side wants to say that we have nothing to do with this kind of incidents that happening in India, they must show a certain amount of statesmanship and say we are going to shut down certain institutions and arrest certain individuals and sort of put them on behind prison or put them on trial. They haven't done that. So I think to put all responsibility or burden of proof on India is actually blaming the victim and against natural justice. That's all I have to say about that. Back to Yogesh.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob. General Huda?
So Yogesh, this whole issue of can we see a terror-free Pakistan? I think I'm very cynical about this, and I say this for two reasons. The first is the Pakistan military, and particularly the Pakistan army, has long used non-state actors, terrorists, as a frontline force against India. This is no secret, and so to completely shut off this tap is going to be extremely difficult. And the second reason is this military jihad complex has now become so deeply entrenched that even if Pakistan army wants to shut it off, they're going to face a serious backlash from groups like the Jaish and the Lashkar. So in the short term, we do hope that here is a neighbor, that is fully democratic, that doesn't use terrorism as an instrument of state policy. But as I said, these very deeply entrenched behavior and looking at India as an existential threat to Pakistan, unless this attitude changes, nothing is going to happen. On the Rafale issue, Yogesh, I've already mentioned, look, you carry out a military operation, it would be utopian to think, look, no casualties will happen, nothing is going to take place. But as I said, I think this conflict of 88 hours is too short to start making real serious assumptions on which weapon system is good, which equipment is good, which is bad. So I think this has been raised too much in the international media. I frankly think doesn't deserve the attention that it is getting.
Could you also talk about the Indian defense systems? Because there's, briefly Indian missile defense systems, because that was part of the question.
Look, so we have, the S-400 is a very good defense system, but obviously not really effective against drones. And similarly, we have our own indigenous Akash air defense system. I think some of our legacy equipment, the old, Zoo guns and the L-70s, did fairly well against drones. There is a very integrated system which has now come into place between the Army and the Air Force. So the Army has an Akash Tir air defense control system. The Air Force has its own system. That's really got well integrated. So I would say the air defense system is fairly good. Do we need to improve it against drones, which we are going to see increasing use of? Yes, we do need better counter-drone systems. We need better electronic warfare. So while it has worked well in this case, I think the manner in which the drones are being employed, for example, in Ukraine, and if we see increasing use like that, we will need to upgrade our air defense systems.
Great. Suhasini ma'am, can you speak briefly about the attribution issue as well as the media in this conflict? Thank you.
Was there a specific question about the media which I missed because I was trying to write them down?
Media and disinformation. Yogesh, you are muted.
There was a question about Indian media and the disinformation and the misinformation during the conflict, which we witnessed.
Okay. To start with, when you speak about the attribution, I honestly, agree with Dr. Jacob that after a point, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, you have to at some point just accept it. But I want to change a bit and answer the second question as well about a terror-free Pakistan. It is obvious to all of us that in our lifetime, we probably won't see that. But it is also should be possible to think out of the box and to think about a situation that could bring such a thing about. And it is not for want of trying. So you have to look back and say, has this ever happened before? 2008, the Mumbai attacks were unusual for a different reason. It was the first and the last time the Pakistani political establishment accepted that the attacks had been, the conspiracy for the attacks had been carried out in Pakistan. The Federal Investigation Agency of Pakistan carried out what seemed to be a fairly credible trial, taking help from India, getting information from India and from other countries. They actually pieced together the entire conspiracy that the Lashkar-e-Toiba had carried out, where the plot was hatched, where the training was given in Thatta and Sindh, where the boat for those terrorists was bought from. They went to Japan and got the chassis number that was matched as well. They put Hafiz Saeed, Zakiur Rahman Lakhvi, and so many others in custody. So it happened. It didn't last very long, and the moment it got too close in terms of voice, the voice matching that they had wanted, because they were able to find even the control room in Karachi from where the attacks had been, had been directed. They'd been speaking to the terrorists in Mumbai. I'm giving you all of this because people forget that it is possible to do. But that takes a concerted effort. It takes a concerted effort of international pressure as well, which India was able to launch after 2008. I'm not saying that it can't do that again. I'm just saying that that requires to have the international community on board with everything that India plans to do. And as I said, this new normal may work for India. It might assuage at least Indian feelings, but it does seem like that is something the international community is going to have a lot of questions about and will want some checks and balances on. There is only one period, perhaps in the last 30, 40 years, when India and Pakistan sustained a level of dialogue towards an actual resolution. And that was the 2003 to 2008 period. The fact was that what they were working towards was a solution that would somehow make the line of control a de jure international boundary. It may seem impossible today. Certainly, Pakistan has consistently avoided it. India, in this mood, certainly, I think people in India would not want to look at it, because it involves the ability to say that the other side of Kashmir will not come back. But if at some point in the future we were not able to change the reality on the ground any other way, and Pakistan has shown it is, despite talking about 1,000-year cuts and all the rest of it, it has not been able to actually bring any change in either what India feels or what the international community feels on the subject of Kashmir. Then I think it is necessary to see what it would mean to make the line of control as close to the international boundary as possible. I think it would have three effects. The first would certainly be to seal a permeable, impermanent boundary. And the truth is that most of the infiltration we see is not at the international boundary between India and Pakistan, but over the LOC. The second, I think there are those who still may feel that there is some idea of a free, independent Kashmir that could in the future come again, as they had thought about it from 1948. I think this kind of an agreement on that would actually obviate that, would actually close any false hopes that those who think about a different kind of movement are beguiled into doing. And the third is, I think it would severely curtail the powers of the Pakistani military if it were very clear that a government in Pakistan was able to accept a more permanent international boundary there. I think that is possibly one of the reasons why the Mumbai attacks happened when they did, because they had come so close. And, it's not something I'm saying. If you read the works of the interlocutors at the time, including from our side, Satinder Lamba, you do see how cogent a plan had been made at that time. I'm not saying this is a reality today. I'm just saying that for the person who asked the question, that can we imagine a different reality? I think we can work certainly towards it. I would say that talks did not. And, Dr. Jacob, me, General Huda have all been part of track 2 processes at different times. While I would say, yes, it is true that talking to each other has not produced a different result. Not talking has also not done so. So in the last decade, if there is some learning, it is that this is also not the solution. We need to keep looking.
Thank you so much. We are much over time now, but I just wanted to end this conversation by saying that these are very complex issues. As a scholar who looks at military force, the use of force, its intersection with international security. These are issues which need utmost analysis and careful consideration. As I said before, states do not resort to use of force lightly, and they should not, right? And it is all the more important because even if a state has to make its deterrence more credible, it has to study its own successes and failures. And therefore, conflicts like these must be studied, must be analyzed thoroughly, if whether from a national point of view or from a disciplinary perspective. I could not thank our panelists enough. This was a very short period of time and they all came together. And I'm really very, very grateful for your time and effort. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the audience for being patient, asking questions. And I look forward to further engagements with the India Center. Thank you so much. Over and out for today. Bye-bye.
Okay, Yogesh. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.